Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this pair of Malifaux Medical Automatons. The picture on the front of the box gives me a lot of faith in these automatons. I'm sure they would take very good care of my medical needs. The back of the box shows us two digital renderings of these little robots, and that's all. I don't suppose we really need much else anyway. Inside the box we find a pair of stat cards. These are pretty much what you would expect, though they will soon be irrelevant with the coming release of Malifaux 3rd edition. The models themselves should still be usable in the new edition, so there's no need to worry about that. We also get this pair of bases. They certainly are bases. The two medical automatons come on one sprue, and as you can see, it's quite neat. This is what I expect of Malifaux. There are mold lines of course, particularly on the hose-like flexible arms. Well, they look flexible anyway, but on the model they aren't. You know what I mean. Some of the mold lines are pretty big, though most are fairly minor. The parts are easy enough to clean up and the detail is very good. I can't comment on the realism of the details, being that this isn't a real thing, but there are a bunch of interesting bits and pieces all over, and we can invent whatever function for those we want. This looks as though it will be a fairly easy kit to put together, but not without instructions, and instructions are not included in the box. That is pretty standard for Malifaux kits though. What is included is a card stating that we can find the instructions, seen here, on the Malifaux website. To make things easier for you, I will put a link in the description. There is a single exploded diagram for each automaton, and for the most part it's clear enough. I did experience a little bit of confusion around some parts, but that's probably more of a problem with myself than the instructions. Let's get to building. I started with Automaton 2 because why not? It seemed like a really good idea to start with the wheel thing. Ha ha ha! New and original jokes. This is actually a pretty simple assembly once you figure out which parts to use. I was a bit confused by one of the parts that turned out to be the claw arm thing, and not part of the wheel assembly. This is where another angle on the exploded diagram would have been nice. There are guide nubs for both halves of the wheel, so if you've got the parts the right way around to begin with, it's nearly impossible to get them to sit in the wrong place. I apply a bit of pressure to make sure the bond is good and tight. There is still a tiny bit of a gap you can see on the tyres, but it's not too bad at all. I then attach that assembly to the central plate part, I guess you might call it. The way this is shaped makes it pretty simple to get positioned correctly. Our old friend pressure makes another appearance, and it seems to fit together rather nicely. Then comes this rounded, platey, skirty thing. This protects the back of the wheelie area and probably has some kind of equipment inside. There is some keying to help you get this on nice and neat. There are some bits in the space between the shieldy bit and the central plate that might be interesting when it comes time to paint this. Now it's time to work on the upper half. First, I join these two bits, which form a ring with some little bumps around the outside. I then glue, with quite a bit of glue, this assembly onto the top of the robot. There's a hole in the rear that should line up with the notch in the upper part. This is where an arm will sit, so do make sure these parts line up. Then, on top of that, I attach this hat. It's a very fancy pointy medical hat. It lets you know that this is a medical automaton, so you can trust it. You can definitely trust it. This part has some keying and is pretty simple to get into place. So far, it's a very nice little ball-shaped robo-boy. Now it's time to attach the arms, so that it can do medical stuff, which is the entire point. First, the arm that sits in the hole on the rear of the body that I mentioned moments ago. This is pretty simple to install. I think it's meant to lock into a certain spot, but there's enough play in it that you do have a little bit of freedom with how you place it. I then attach its left arm, claw, thing. I wasn't 100% clear where this should go, but it seems like where I've put it is right. In the corner of the rounded lower plate thing and the central plate. Looks right to me anyway. The claw does seem to sit at a bit of a different angle than the image on the back of the box would seem to suggest, but it looks fine to me. The other claw arm seems to sit a bit further forward on the right side. Both of these arms were a little bit fiddly to get into place, but I did get them there in the end, and that's what matters. I think this little guy looks pretty cool. We do still have one more automaton to make though, so we can't stop now. As you may have noticed on the box, this one is a completely different shape. I glue the two halves of the main body together. This is easy. The parts are keyed and slide together nicely. I was a little bit concerned that I might need to sandwich some arm parts between the main body parts, but it turns out that wasn't the case. Before we get to that, I attach the wheels. This automaton is more of a tricycle than a single-wheeled balance boy like the other one, which you can see in the background not balancing at all. The wheel parts go into place nice and easily, with a click. They won't stay there of their own volition though, so obviously glue is needed. Next comes the little support wheel that goes on the back here. This is simple enough to attach. You obviously need to place it so the wheel faces towards the ground rather than the sky. That makes sense, right? Now it can stand by itself, which is quite handy. I then attach the upper parts, starting with this, what might be called a head. This has keying and I'm pretty sure I put it in correctly. However, the lid of the head, which also had keying, didn't quite go on right, and the hat ended up all wonky. I fixed it by prying the parts off and re-gluing them. Probably not a bad idea to do better test fitting than I did. It did end up looking correct, and that's really what matters. It's now got a nice pointy medical hat like the other automaton, so you know to trust it with your life. Next, I glue this backpack looking thing onto the rear of the body. There's keying here, which is pretty helpful. It should be placed with the little round tube things, maybe exhaust pipes, facing upwards. Onto that, I attach a set of hosey, cabley things. I wasn't really expecting this part to go into place as easily as it did. Of course, I'm not complaining about that. I do like easy. Slightly less easy was the left arm thing. This looks like it has some sort of tap on the end, maybe for filling up wounds with extra blood or something. There's a hole into which this should go, but it was kind of tricky to get it to look neat. It's probably not on exactly the way it was intended, but it looks decent enough to me. The arm or arms on the right side are a bit more complex. You could glue these parts together and then glue them onto the body, or you could do it the way I did. Both ways are valid. I think the way I've done it is a bit easier though. That is, first gluing the base of the arms onto the body, letting it set for a bit, and then gluing the end part to the rest of the arm. This was a bit fiddly, but not quite as bad as I was expecting. It did take a bit of nudging and such, but I got there in the end. There is a point where the arms contact the body, so you can add some glue there for a bit of extra strength. And that's the second medical automaton completed. Well, it's actually the first one. I built them out of the order the instructions suggested because I'm a rebel. At any rate, it looks safe and trustworthy. And that's the entire medical automaton kit completed. I've stuck the single wheel model to the base with some blue tack. I'm probably going to have to put a pin in the bottom of it before I paint it. The other one is freestanding, which is nice. I'll probably pin that one too, just to make handling it easier when I paint it. I'm pretty happy with these little robo boys. They're quite interesting looking, and there's a lot of bits and pieces and nice looking details you could pick out that should make them quite fun to paint, and I think they'll look great when I do eventually paint them. I don't plan to do that soon, but I will eventually do it. Some of the assembly was a little bit confusing, but other than that the build was enjoyable and didn't take too long. I built this on stream and it only took a couple of hours. Obviously, if you're not streaming, filming and making notes and such, you'll be able to put this together much quicker than I did. By the way, if you would like to watch me build models live on stream, there's a link to my Twitch channel in the description. I would appreciate it if you were to give me a follow, then you'll be notified when I go live. It'll be good times. I have no idea how these models work in Malifaux. For all I know, they could be the worst unit to take ever. That doesn't really matter to me. What I'm interested in is having some cool little robo boys. I feel that Malifaux plastic models are rather high quality, and they're always a pleasure to build. Well, almost always. Sometimes there are issues, but in my experience that's quite rare. So, I think these little medical automatons are pretty cool. What do you think? Have you built these yourself? What colour would you paint them if you were given the choice? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, follow, ring the bell, and all the other things you do on YouTube and social media. Links to all of the things, including my Patreon and Twitch channel, are in the description below. You can also find the join button down there somewhere. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.